Good evening and welcome to our third garden hour of the season. My name is Kristine Lang and I'm an assistant professor and SDSU Extension Consumer Horticulture Specialist. And it's my pleasure to be joining you tonight for my first garden hour of the 2024 season. Joining me tonight, we have Hannah Voy and Robin Buterbaugh as panelists, and we're really excited to share a variety of information with you. And as I look out the window, thank goodness it's stopped raining so we can get back to thinking about gardening and we'll be in great shape for the rest of the week. So Hannah, can you give us a little teaser of what you plan on talking about tonight?
My name is Hannah Voy. I'm a graduate student of Dr. Lang. I'm working on a project called soil tarping. And within that project, we are looking at onions. So we're using onions as our test crop for a weed management technique. So I'm going to be talking about onions today, and I'm really excited about that.
Awesome. And Hannah and the crew have been hard at work in the field, so I'm guessing we're going to hear some from the field stories, if you will. And joining us for her second garden hour of the 2024 official season is Robin Buterbaugh, our new horticulture field specialist. And Robin, what's on the docket tonight?
Tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about the SDSU Native Plant Initiative. They have quite a few plant sales coming up this summer season. We just had one on Sunday at the Garden Discovery Festival. That was our first one. But I'm going to talk about some of the upcoming ones and give some highlights on the plants that they will have available.
Awesome. So if we have any questions about native plants, we should be thinking about those and jotting them down now, right?
Yep.
Excellent. And I'm going to fill you all in on where in the world I've been and why you haven't seen me the last couple of weeks. I'll give you a hint. It has something to do with a little construction project on campus. So I'll be rounding us out tonight and sharing a little bit more about that. I'll just leave some mystery to surround it. As always with Garden Hour, we love questions. So if you have any questions during the course of the program, please put those in the Q&A, and in between each speaker, we'll take time to have discussion and answer as many of those questions as we can. So whatever you're curious about, you let us know and we're happy to help. So kicking us off tonight, we are going to have Hannah Voy, who is a second year master's student, and myself and Rhoda Burrows have the great pleasure of co-advising Hannah. And she has really become our onion expert in the lab. So I'm going to let Hannah take it away and tell us what we should know.
Awesome. All right. And my screen's all good?
It looks awesome.
Great. So like I said, I'm looking at onions this year. This is my second year studying soil tarping and onions. So I'm going to be going over just a little bit of what that's been looking like for us and how we've been growing onions and the type of data that we've been collecting as we're studying soil tarping and onions. All right. So to start off, a lot of you probably already have had onions before. You've had some type of experience with onions, but you may not know that onions are actually the fourth most consumed fresh vegetable in the United States. And this is not only due to the flavor that they can add to so many different dishes, but they're also a great nutritional source as well. They're a great source of vitamin C, and they're a great source of fiber as well. So onions in their production, they're a little bit, they're actually highly susceptible to weeds. And this is not only due to their minimal canopy, but also their slow initial growth. So as you can see in this left photo here, these onions are at very close to maturity. Their leaves are toppling over, which means they're almost ready to harvest. And you can see that they're not covering the soil very well. And so this makes them very susceptible to weed seeds coming up and competing with them for nutrients and light. So when choosing onions to grow, it's very important to choose the correct cultivar of onion for your area. So this is kind of a map from Johnny's Selected Seeds, and it's kind of showing the three different categories of onions that are grown in different areas. So there are long day onions, there's intermediate day onions, and there's short day onions. In our area, we normally grow long day onions, which basically means that they need 14 to 16 hours of light in order to start bulbing. Now, there's also intermediate day onions, which are normally grown in the middle of the states, and that's where they need 12 to 14 hours to start bulbing. And then down south, it's 10 to 12 hours, which is short day onions. And they need 10 to 12 hours to start bulbing there. So something to keep in mind later when I get into more of our experience with growing onions. So the onion cultivars that we chose for our study are Candy, Barolo, and Patterson onions. And all of these photos are courtesy of Johnny's Selected Seeds. This is what they show on their website. Candy onions, they are a yellow onion, and they're a day neutral onion. So it's kind of cutting it close for our area. Our area is more prone to long day onions. Long day onions grow better in our area. But we decided to try a day neutral onion and see how it goes. We found that our candy onions had a very sweet flavor, as the name says. We also grew Barolo onions, which are a red onion, and they're a long day onion, and they have kind of a more spicy flavor to them. And then finally Patterson onion, which is another yellow onion, and this onion is another long day onion. But this onion is very well known for its long storage, and we really did see that in our experience growing with them last year. So we started our onions in the greenhouse from seed. You can see in this first photo, they're just popping up through the soil, and then that second photo is a few weeks later, and that third photo is a few weeks after that. Now, in these photos, you can see that they're a little bit yellowing, and that was us trying to figure out fertilizer, how much to fertilize them. Onions are pretty fertilizer, nitrogen hungry crops, so I think we under fertilized them a little bit, and that's why they were getting some yellow there. You can also see in that third photo, they have these little bulbs on them, and we're not absolutely sure why that started happening. It did happen for all cultivars. Originally, we thought it was because the daylight, the lighting in the greenhouse was very long. So we had our greenhouse set last year from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. lighting, which is a very long amount of time. So we thought maybe that long amount of lighting had triggered the bulbing. But we fixed that this year and they still started bulbing. So we're kind of still troubleshooting that, figuring out why that happened. It could have been stress, could have had something to do with watering or heat or something like that. So not really sure what's going on there, but something interesting to look more into. We planted our onions last year in May. So we started them from seed February 28th, and then we planted them May 31st, and that was last year. This year, similar, we planted them in the greenhouse on February 28th, and then this year we did a little bit early of a planting out in the field, which was May 15th. So just this past week, we finished planting up our onions. And you can see they're very small in those photos in the field. We did a light power harrow with a BCS tiller attachment, just to make sure that we had easy transplanting, good soil to transplant into. We also installed drip irrigation, and we used a pre-plant granular fertilizer of potassium nitrate. I think there's a typo there. Sorry about that. So during the growing season, we also fertilized. We fertilized using a 10-4-3 Nature Source fertilizer, and we did that through fertigation, which is adding a liquid fertilizer into your irrigation lines. So for that, we used a dosatron. And if you have any questions about that, always happy to answer questions. We also did a biweekly weeding events, so doing some cultivation there. For harvesting the onions, we harvested them August 28th, and we cured them for about 1 month in the greenhouse after we harvested them. You can see we had some fans set up in there. We had it set to a more dry temperature to reduce that humidity and really allow those onions to cure and dry out before collecting data on them. And then finally, for data collection, we found some funky onions. And I think some of this could have been due to some mechanical damage in the field with our hand hose, maybe hitting the onions sometimes, but the ones that weren't slightly damaged or kind of funky looking, we went ahead and we measured these for size. The USDA has different size categories for onions. And so we did that using a ruler and these 2 wood blocks. And then we also looked at the weight of the onions and the quality of the onions. So we sorted them by cull, which was the bad, suspicious looking onions, and then the marketable onions. So some main takeaways for us this growing season was just making sure to choose the correct cultivar for the area, considering that day length, looking at water and stress conditions, so that temperature, making sure it doesn't get too hot at certain times of the year, and then fertilizing for optimum size, making sure that you have a good amount of nitrogen going into those onions, and also fertilizing at the right time. We found we fertilized a little late last year, and then we found an article that mentioned if you fertilize later in the season, it can cause your onions to be a little more potent. So we did note that our onions were pretty potent this year. They were pretty strong. So yeah, just some main takeaways for us. And finally, I want to thank you all for listening. Thank you for having me on here. Here's my contact information and some resources about the project that we're doing. It's our first year. Research publication is that first resource. And then that second one is just talking about soil tarping, which is the main project that we're working on. So yeah, thank you all for taking the time to listen.
All right. If anyone has questions about onions or, wants a further explanation of soil tarping, we're always happy to address those. And Hannah, I did see that we have one question, a couple of questions already. So folks are wondering if we can add those links in the chat. And I have put the link to early season soil tarping impacts. And I can also pull or ask my lovely assistant in the background, Matt, to pull the other link about soil tarping and how it is used. And just a reminder for folks who might be watching the recording after the fact, if you look up SDSU Extension Horticulture Research, that jumps you to a nice landing page where you can see Hannah's work and the work of many of her lovely classmates from our research lab. So Hannah, I see a couple of questions pouring in. Rain pun intended. So the first question is, were your onion seeds pelleted? And if folks are wondering what is a pelleted seed, that's a seed that's typically rolled in some sort of a clay coating that makes it easier to handle. So Hannah, were your onion seeds pelleted?
I don't believe so.
And I think you're correct, because I was I was honestly just double checking the supplier website. I'm like, they're not saying it's pelleted, and it certainly didn't feel like it. So
yeah, I didn't see anything saying that they were pelleted, so I'm assuming no.
And they were pretty tiny. So Hannah, on the spectrum of tiny seeds, how tiny are the onion seeds, or how would you describe them to folks compared to a sunflower seed or a grass seed, maybe?
Yeah, definitely very, very small. Oh my gosh, I would say like a little bit bigger than the end of a needle, like maybe like 10 times the end of a needle. They're very small though, like you really have to pick them. We had a research assistant last year complaining. He was like, my fingers are too fat to plant these seeds. They're so small. So yes, they're very small seeds for sure.
So onions take a bit of patience. And if you're someone who maybe doesn't want to work with nimbly bimbly fingers, looking for pelleted onion seeds could be helpful. So Hannah, the next question for you is, there's someone who has a really heavy clay soil where they grow their crops. Is tilling necessary for onions, or are there no-till options? And maybe this is a chance to talk a little bit more about your overall system.
Yeah, so the weed suppression technique that we're using is soil tarping, and that's normally used in no-till operations. We tilled our or we lightly harrowed. There's a difference between a harrow and a tiller. A harrow kind of goes more like this and like mixes the soil. A tiller kind of like goes over like this and like turns over the soil. So I would say for us, tarping is normally used for a no-till option. I know Iowa State for their onions, they use plastic mulch as a weed suppression technique. I'm not sure if they use tillage, but I do believe that our soil on our site is pretty high in clay content as well. So they have done pretty well in our site where it's high clay content. But yeah, I guess for other no-till options, I can't think of any off the top of my head aside from the plastic mulch and the soil tarping that we're studying.
So Hannah, probably no surprise here. We do have a question about bulb formation in onions, and we can certainly share this question if you'd like, but I know you've dug pretty deep on this. So if we planted short day onions in South Dakota, would they still grow and just be harvested earlier in the season, or what would happen if we planted, you know, those Texas onions up here in South Dakota?
I would think that they would bulb sooner than the normal ones. So I guess I'm not quite sure. I haven't done a lot of research on how short day onions. I've more looked at the day neutral onions, and since we're growing the day neutral onions, but that's a really good question. I'm not quite sure.
So I can add, because I had to kind of dust off my memory on this one.
Yeah.
But that daylight trigger, so whether it's less daylight or more daylight, you know, less daylight in a state like Texas or more daylight in the summer in a state like South Dakota, really what that's signaling from a plant perspective for everyone listening in is that shift from I'm just growing green leaves and vegetation to I'm forming bulbs. And so if we take a short day onion and plant it in a state like South Dakota, we're going to have pretty disappointingly small bulbs because you're not going to get a lot of green growth before, kind of like what Hannah and I saw happening in the greenhouse, actually, where the onion is like, okay, it's time to make bulbs now. And it doesn't really have enough green tissue to photosynthesize to support that bulb formation. So it can be done. You'd have some pretty small onions is what the hypothesis is. So just something to keep in mind. And I guess this is maybe an interesting point to talk about now, Hannah. You know, crops like my tomatoes, I got really lazy this year and I seeded like 4 weeks ago, and I'm still planning on having tomato seedlings to put out in my garden. Could I do that successfully with your onions, do you think, based on your seeding timeline?
Probably not. I know our onions are just so slow growing that they were very, very tiny and they would just be walloped by any weeds or anything like that out there. So I would definitely give them a little time in the greenhouse first.
Yep. And for folks who are starting onions from seed and planning to do this at home, you know, what month should they be thinking about doing that next year?
Very early spring. Yeah, I would say, yeah, early spring for sure.
And so I know of some master gardeners who are starting their onions at the end of January if they're really targeting an early spring planting. I know, Hannah, you were seeding your onions in February, if memory serves, correct? Late
Yes,
February,
yeah.
early.
So yeah, we seeded them February 28th, so pretty early for sure.
So, and all of that to say, there are still opportunities to go to your garden center and get some onion starts, or I don't know that I always see the garden center selling onion transplants, but to start onions from seed on May 21st might be a little bit tricky. But again, there are still ways to get those onions planted. Maybe just give it a day or two for field conditions to dry out first. But if you were planning on doing onions, I would do it in the next week or so, or over the Memorial Day weekend, and then consider it good. So any other parting wisdom on onions right now that you want us to know, Hannah?
Nope, I think I covered it.
All right. Well, just a reminder for everyone, Hannah's going to hang out with us in the background. So if you think of any additional questions, we can certainly bring Hannah back for discussion. So kind of pivoting away from vegetables and to some other fun plant materials, some of which you could eat or potentially make into a tea, right, Robin? So I'm really happy to welcome Robin as our second panelist, and we can hear all sorts of awesome things about what the Native Plant Initiative has in store for us. So Robin, take it away.
Right, that sounds good. Well, actually, I do have a quick question about onions, if that's still allowed. I can wait till later, but I was just curious about drying them. Did you flip the bags over in the greenhouse when they were drying? I know there's all kinds of different techniques for drying, like braiding, or, did you have any issues with kind of getting mushy?
Ooh, all right, Hannah. So a little bit more onion.
Yeah, we did not. So we didn't flip our bags over. We kind of tried to keep them in like one single layer, and the bags had like good holes in them for aeration. We didn't see a ton of mushy ones. There were a few here and there, but not a ton. We had some good like dry conditions in there with the fans, and then we changed the greenhouse conditions to be like a little more hot and dry conditions. So we didn't have a lot of issues with that mushiness, which we did
Okay,
have
good.
some critiques about that. Some people were a little worried that would
Mm.
happen, but it
Yeah.
didn't. So yeah,
Yeah, no,
thank
I
you
was
for
just
the
curious when I saw that picture. I was like, wow, that's a lot of onions. It
Yeah.
was probably very potent in there too.
Yeah,
It was. We had a
definitely.
lot of interesting smells in that greenhouse. And I'll just give a shout out to Christiana from Prairie Coteau Farm, was super kind and let me and Hannah and a few other folks visit and see how she cured her garlic, which really provided some great inspiration for how in the world do you cure this many onions at scale. So it was really kind of her to share her plans. And now to officially round out onions for a little bit, I see that someone shared that they usually start their Patterson seed indoors at the end of January and plant outdoors in mid-April. So that aligns with kind of our timelines a little bit earlier. And then I see that someone said they winter sowed in milk jugs in March and had good results. So Robin, maybe we'll have to round it out with some winter sowing discussions too, because I know you also enjoy discussing that.
Yep.
All right, so transitioning away from onions and back to native plants.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. And as many of you know, I was previously a grad student at SDSU in the Natural Resources Management Department, working with Dr. Laura Perkins in the Native Plant Initiative. So even though now I'm with SDSU Extension Horticulture, I really, couldn't give up working with them. So I do like to still work closely with her and all of her grad students, helping out with the plant sales and things like that. So I just thought it'd be kind of cool to highlight the plant sales that they have coming up. And because I do talk about native plants a lot when I'm out and around at different events, kind of highlight some of those plants, answer any questions about specific planting or characteristics that anybody might have. So with that, unfortunately, May 19th is passed. So if you weren't at the Garden Discovery Festival at McCrory and Brookings, you missed the first plant sale, but don't worry because it's not the last plant sale. We had a great turnout despite the weather, but we have quite a few more coming up. So the next plant sale that we're going to have is going to be June 1st in Spearfish at the Spearfish City Park. There's a kind of a little building there. I don't know completely the times for each of these, so stay tuned to the Facebook page for the official times. That June 1st one is in Spearfish, and then June 2nd in Rapid City at the Jolly Lane Greenhouse. Again, I'm not sure about the time, but we were really excited to offer a plant sale in Spearfish last year, and the turnout was really great, even though last year in Spearfish, it poured rain the entire day, and we still had people driving and coming out to get plants, so that was super exciting. So we wanted to make sure to go back there again, and then also to Rapid City, just so that we could really kind of provide representation for all of our West River folks. Then on June 15th, we're going to have another plant sale in Huron. That's going to be at the East River Greenhouse. And so that will kind of be edging into the summer season. June 22nd, we're going to have one in Sioux Falls at the Landscape Garden Center. I think that one is going to be 10 to 2, and then I'll be actually doing a native plant talk at that one as well, if you're interested. And then just because midsummer isn't the best time for planting native plants, we kind of hold off and then keep the plants in the greenhouse, keep them as cool as possible, keep them watered, and then offer them again in the fall. So on August 3rd at the garden party at McCrory Gardens, we're going to be having a final plant sale in Brookings. And I will say from my work, actually fall planting is a great time to plant native plants. Pretty much all the projects that I worked on, I did fall plantings in September and even into October. And they actually really had real great survival. So I would say spring is great, but fall is just as good, if not even better. So this is kind of a big table. I'm not going to expect everybody to read it. I just wanted to highlight a couple things because we're having a plant sale or plant sales in the Black Hills. We do have some plants that are specifically from the Black Hills area. That first one, Balsameriza sagittata, the arrowleaf balsamer, is a pretty cool plant that's found in the hills. So that one, and then those two lupine species are also specific for the western kind of Black Hills region. So on this big table here, those ones are specifically going to find favorable conditions out in the hills. So you may or may not want to try to plant them East River. It's really not the most appropriate habitat unless you might have some specific microclimate conditions if you got kind of a really hot, dry area, depending on your soil type as well. So I just wanted to point those plants out initially. And then we have a few fan favorites. You know, every year we usually have butterfly milkweed because people really love that one. Of course, milkweed is the host plant for the monarch butterfly. So we want to make sure that we always have milkweeds available. And then another crowd favorite is always the GM triflorum, the prairie smoke. That one's got just a really cool seed head. It kind of looks like a Dr. Seuss plant. So we always grow that one as well. Also Liatris, that's a really good one. It depends on which species we plant. Sometimes we'll plant like a Pycnostachya, or sometimes we'll plant the Ligula stylus. So like a prairie blazing star versus a Rocky Mountain blazing star. But usually we always like to keep a Liatris species on our plant list. Here's the second page. Unfortunately, the Scarlet Globe Mallow was another one of our West River plants, and that one is already sold out for the season. So some of these, you know, are a little bit trickier to germinate. So we might plant 200 plants, and then we might get germination for only, you know, 20 or 50, or maybe sometimes it's even 10. So if that happens, then first come, first served, I guess. So some of those plants are in high demand and they sell out pretty quickly. We do have a couple other ones that aren't on here that are part of like our packs and that would be appropriate for West River, but maybe people in West River already have plenty of those. So we do have yucca, glauca, and I know that out there some people kind of consider it a weed, but there's a lot of really good architectural interest to yucca, and so it's a good plant for rock gardens or xeriscaping. So if you need yucca, I think we also do have some of those available. So on this table, which I think will be posted on their website, they do have indications as for particular characteristics for the plants. So some of them are really good for bees, especially native bees. Some of them are good for butterflies and moths. Some of them have seeds that are eaten by birds. We also always sell the Eastern Passflower, and that is our South Dakota state flower. And then we also are offering this year our state grass, which is Western wheatgrass. And so I'll show a couple pictures of those here in just a couple minutes. Let's see. Yeah. So I just wanted to highlight, as I mentioned, a couple of the plants that we have available. So these are plants that are going to be good in the spring, so early bloomers, and they are going to be plants that are good for sun. So as I mentioned, the prairie smoke, GM triflorum, is really, it has a very inconspicuous flower. So that kind of like fuzzy bud looking part of it in the background is actually the flower. So it almost just looks like it's a bud that hasn't been opened yet. So if you're kind of like waiting and being like, oh, it's going to flower, actually that's it. But the most exciting part about this is the seed head, which is the foreground picture. And it's kind of got those like wispy, whiskery kind of tendrils, and it's just really a cool plant. The middle plant is a golden Alexander, and that is actually in the carrot family. It's also an early bloomer. It does well in both kind of dry to medium like moisture levels. And it's also a host plant for the black swallowtail butterfly. So that is kind of a great interact or association between our native plants and our pollinators and butterflies. And then the plant on the right is field pussy toes, Antonaria neglecta. And this is actually used occasionally in lawn alternatives because it really makes a good ground cover. It blooms in the spring and it's got that kind of like fuzzy pussy willow head to it. And it's really kind of an interesting plant. I think they look really cool as well. A couple more plants that we have for sun. This is moving into summer. So a new plant that the Native Plant Initiative hasn't grown before, at least to my knowledge, is blue flax, Linum lewisi. And this one has got just a really pretty blue flower to it. You don't really see a lot of native plants with blue flowers. So that just makes it an extra kind of special offering just because I love blue. Of course, I love purple, but having some blue plants to add to the mix is really great. The middle plant, lead plant, is probably one of my favorite plants just because I kind of like the weird looking plants. It's got a very unique kind of flower head. It's also a nitrogen fixing plant. So you can see it's got those kind of compound pinnate leaves that are kind of frilly. And I really like that leaf structure. This plant goes well with butterfly milkweed, and actually I have it planted together with the butterfly milkweed, and so it's got like the purple spikes of the flower heads with the butterfly milkweed orange flowers in the background. Really kind of provide some visual interest in a planting if you want to plant those together. The plants on the right is butterfly milkweed, Asclepias tuberosa. This is a really great milkweed for home landscapes because it's not very vigorous. It kind of like stays well behaved and stays put compared to some of your like common milkweed species where you'll see that it starts to kind of grow rhizomatously throughout your entire yard. And it's also got a really cool orange flower to it. So it's a little bit different than some of the other milkweed species. So this year, NPI doesn't have a huge amount of plants that are going to bloom in fall, but it does. We always do like to have an aster because those are one of the great nectar sources and pollen sources for the late season for bees. So this year we're trying aromatic aster, Symphotrichum oblongifolium. This one is an aster that doesn't get quite as tall as like your New England aster or even the smooth blue aster. It only gets to be about 1 or 2 feet, and it kind of has more of a spreading bushy habitat. So it's just more of a kind of like low growing, almost a ground cover type of an aster. And again, this usually blooms in September, October, even some species of aster can grow into November, or especially if the weather is good here. And then the second plant here is the Rocky Mountain blazing star, the Liatris ligulostylus. And this is a great example of a plant that butterflies love. They call it the ice cream plant for butterflies. And if you ever visit McCrory Gardens in September, in the very central planting right to the south of the building is full of Liatris. And if you walk through there, it's like walking through a cloud of monarch butterflies. It's just kind of a magical experience. So those are 2 really great plants for fall. Another plant that isn't specifically being offered as a sun plant for fall through NPI this year is goldenrod. So like showy goldenrod is a great one that works really well with both the asters and the Liatris. I do have a couple grasses here. We have a few grasses available for the plant sales this year. The 2 that are highlighted here are June grass, Calaria macrantha, and then prairie dropseed or Sporobolus heterolepis. These are really 2 great grasses that can be used in home landscaping. They have a really good kind of structural interest. The June grass has that very upright structure, and it only grows to about 1 to 2 feet tall, but it kind of reminds me of that, like the Calamagrostis Carl Forrester that you see planted in landscaping pretty much everywhere in your communities, in kind of like landscaping rock outside of schools and businesses. But this one is actually a native alternative to that, and it doesn't grow quite as tall, but it's got a really attractive seed head. And then the prairie dropseed is also a bunch forming grass. It's a warm season grass. And so it will form kind of a full attractive bunch. And then later in the season, kind of put out those seed heads that are good for butterflies, and birds like to eat them as well. And I'll mention June grass is a cool season grass. So it is nice to have both cool season and warm season grasses in your native plantings, just so that you can have some interest earlier in the spring. And I really recommend planting grasses in along with your native plants. That's how they developed in their ecosystem in the prairie. And grasses really provide some of that structure and support to your native plantings. And the roots underground kind of help compete with the native plants in a good way. Because sometimes the native plants that we'll plant that are from harsher conditions in the prairie, once you plant them into your garden or home landscape, they tend to get much taller and can start to look a little scraggly or flop over. And so grasses really help to kind of provide support for those native plantings. So I do have a couple plants here that are for shade or part shade. Of course, you have to remember we're from the prairie, so we don't actually have a lot of trees here. So our plant selections for shade are somewhat limited, but that doesn't mean that we don't still have a lot of really cool plants that we can plant in the shade. This season, the plant sales are going to be offering red columbine, Aquilegia canadensis. And so that is a good spring ephemeral. It's good in kind of woodlands, into part shade situations. It's going to grow early in the spring, and then it's going to kind of die back, and then it'll just be kind of that clover looking foliage. The plant in the middle is a nodding onion, Allium cernuum, and this is a good one for summer. It really thrives in full sun, but you can also plant it in part shade. And the flower heads kind of get their name from the fact that they kind of nod over. That's why they call it a nodding onion. And it's got kind of a white pinkish flower, and the pollinators love it. And then in the fall, we do have a goldenrod. This is zigzag goldenrod, Solidago flexicalis, and it's kind of unusual to have a goldenrod that grows in the shade. So this is a good opportunity to have a yellow blooming flower in the shade in the fall. So let's see. And if you're interested in having a rain garden, that would just be like your downspout can enter into a rain garden a few feet or up to 10 feet or at least 10 feet away from the foundation of your house so you don't get water. But rain gardens are a really good way to help with stormwater runoff. And so a couple plants that are being offered through the plant sales this season are common ironweed, Vernonia fasciculata. This is a really tall plant. It can get to be about 5 to 7 feet tall. So you want to make sure that you have the appropriate location and kind of like scale of landscape for this to fit in. This is also a really good plant for pollinators. And it's got a pretty purple flower. What you can do with the ironweed, though, is if you're familiar with landscaping at all, you can do the Chelsea chop, which if you're familiar with that, it's actually an early season chop of the plant down to about a third or half of the height. And then that will really kind of spur more flowers and budding, and it will keep the height of that plant a little bit more manageable if you don't want a 5 to 7 foot tall plant in your backyard. The second plant for rain gardens is swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata. And actually, Grace Vilmo, one of the NPI grad students, did her research with milkweeds and monarch oviposition and egg laying, and actually found that the swamp milkweed was one of the top milkweeds for monarchs for both eggs and caterpillars. So that was really exciting. And she's going to be presenting her research, I think, coming up tomorrow. So if you're interested in milkweeds and monarchs, Grace is the person to talk to, and she'll have a lot more information about that. We're also offering this year a South Dakota like plant pack of South Dakota plants. And so, oh, I have a typo here. I didn't change it, but this is a pasque flower in the left picture, and then the western wheatgrass on the right. And so those are our state plants. And then here we have the plants for Western South Dakota that I highlighted in that table at the very beginning. The plant on the left is that arrowleaf balsam root. And so it almost looks like kind of a mini sunflower looking plant, but the leaves have that arrow leaf shape, and that's where it gets its name. And then the silvery lupine is a lupine species that grows out in the Black Hills. It's got silvery foliage. We do have a second lupine species, the silky lupine, that is being offered as well. And so if you are interested in native plants and landscaping and providing a little bit more information about what your preferences are, I would really encourage you to fill out this extremely short survey about native plants. It just kind of helps me know what people are interested in as far as their plant purchasing and what their comfort level is with native plants. So if you want to scan that QR code and take a quick survey about native plants, that would be awesome. With that, that's all I have about the plants that are being offered from NPI this year. But if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer those as well.
Robin, we are having some questions, and I think once we pass the baton, so to speak, from you to me, folks are curious if you could send a link to that survey in the chat as well, which I'm guessing you can do for us.
Yes, I will be able to do that. Yep.
Awesome. All right. So I'm gonna work backwards on the questions. So one person is curious, most of the plants that you are featuring and that NPI is highlighting for native plants, are most of them herbaceous perennials or some of them annuals that we have to rely on them dropping seed and coming back that way year over year?
Most all of them are perennials. The only one I think that might not be is the Tahoka daisy. So the Macaranthera tenacetifolia, kind of a mouthful there. The Tahoka daisy is an annual, but it readily self-seeds. So honestly, once you plant that and it flowers, you probably will have it forever. So also be cautioned about that. I did plant that as kind of a placeholder in one of my graduate projects, just because I needed to put something in before my other plants were going to be ready. And I still am pulling up Tahoka daisy from that bed in front of the Ag Museum. Easy to pull up, no problem. I think, it's not like it's an aggressive, like invasive plant or anything, but just be aware and maybe know that you will have that and you don't have to worry about replanting it.
Excellent advice. So one person was asking where we can find out the times of the upcoming plant sale, and I'll just share with folks. I did drop a link to the South Dakota State Native Plant Initiative Facebook page, and they put out, once times are known, they do a really good job of putting out those times and exactly where to be for plant sales. Anything you'd want to add to that, Robin?
I don't think so. I actually don't know when some of them are either. So I'm anxiously awaiting that information as well.
Awesome. So one person is curious, is the Eastern Pasque flower native to the Black Hills, or is there a different one that would be native out there?
I think that the Eastern Pasque flower is native to the whole state. I know it's found here East River, but where it's found East River is often kind of like on those dry hillsides. And I know that people find it out there, and I've seen lots of pictures that people have taken of pasque flowers out in the hills as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes you'll see pasque flowers at landscape centers or in people's landscaping that are much bushier and have darker purple flowers. That's actually a Pulsatilla vulgaris, and that's a European variety of the pasque flower. So it's not a native pasque. However, it is much more long lasting in your landscaping, and it's got a much more, like pronounced purple flower. I know that sometimes the pasques, if you're out walking around, you don't even see them until you've just about stepped on them, because they're kind of like the grass is brown and the flowers are just kind of a very light purple color. But once you see them, then you can oh, the whole hillside is covered with them. And so you really have to kind of be mindful when you're planting them and expecting them to be in your landscape that they are very ephemeral. And really, if you have a rich soil and depending on your location, you might not get as robust growth as you would see when they're in their kind of natural habitat.
Awesome. So I want to touch on we've got several questions left, Robin. So we've had some fun hot topics between you and Hannah tonight. What if we can't get to a plant sale in person? Is it possible to order online?
Well, I know in the past couple years they have had online plant sale ordering capabilities. I haven't actually confirmed with Laura about whether they're doing that this year. However, you can email either Laura Perkins directly, or there's the Native Plant Initiative email. That's sdsU.nrm.nativeplants.sdstate. We can put that in the chat. And then they're very open to pre-orders or special orders. So if you cannot get to a plant sale and you want to come to Brookings to pick up plants, I'm sure that will be definitely an option for people.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Robin. And again, we realize once you're not front and center, you'll drop us some of that information. So circling back to the top of our questions, I did winter sowing of a few native plants. And I just want to highlight for folks that Robin has an awesome article on winter sowing that I'm going to put in the chat because it's too good not to share. But the question is, with these winter sown native plants, that they're really small, and is it best to plant them in their clump, or should this person try to separate them into their individual plants to put them out?
Yeah, I think it would probably, depending on how many plants you have, it wouldn't hurt to kind of hedge your bets and maybe do a little of both. If you have plants that are really tightly packed, you can try to separate some and maybe even up pot them into a larger pot, let those grow a little bit before you transplant them. And then I would say go ahead and try to transplant a clump of them as well. In their natural environment, plants are going to distribute all their seeds. They might grow kind of in a clump or a drift, something like that. And then the hardiest ones are gonna survive. So yeah, you can do a little bit of both.
Awesome. And I'm seeing one last question for you, Robin, and then Hannah, I'm going to queue you up because we know that another onion question came in, so we want to be ready for that. So someone has native plants that I brought in from the pasture and they have become overgrown with brome grass. Do I need to kill everything and start over, or what would be your management suggestions, Robin?
Well, I guess it kind of depends on the plant itself. If it's a plant that has a pretty robust root system, or if it's got a taproot, then you might, and I don't know like what the scale is of the planting that you have, whether it's too much to try to like hand weed. I know that, I'm not a really big proponent of, herbicides unless necessary. So that probably would be my last resort. It really kind of depends on what the plant is. But I would probably first try just doing some hand weeding, because most of those native plants, once their roots are established, they're pretty hardy. And so, they can take a little bit of abuse as far as pulling the brome that's around them. You could also like really, if they're not planted really tightly together, you could pull the brome as much as possible and then do some mulching, like with cardboard or wood chips directly around the plants to kind of suppress some of that brome grass. I know I've planted native plants directly into a bluegrass yard before and just dug a hole smack dab in the middle of the grass. And you definitely have a lot of grass for a while, but the native plants, if once they're established, they will start to take over. It took a little bit of weeding, it took some mulching with wood chips and that sort of thing. But the native plants are growing pretty well. So it's kind of depending on what your tolerance level is for aesthetics as far as what it looks like. But yeah, there's a couple options as far as mulching, hand weeding, and then, worst case scenario, I would say last resort would be herbicide.
Awesome. And I saw one announcement pop up in the chat. And so thanks for someone for sharing that. But a reminder that the Missouri Valley Master Gardeners, so Yankton, will have their native plant sale at the Farmers Market in Yankton on June 1st, beginning at 9 a.m. And it's just a reminder that we've had some wonderful Master Gardener plant sales across the state. Robin and I benefited from one on Sunday. And took some plants home and then suckered our friend Maddie into buying even more of them. So,
Yep.
just a reminder that our SDSU Extension Master Gardeners have been doing some really awesome educational events and plant sales across the state as well. So I'm going to pitch it back to Hannah for a second. A question came up about planting onions. And so the curiosity was someone for the last couple of years has been planting onions from bulbs, which is one method of planting onions. And they ended up producing really soft onions. But then when they transitioned to using plants, they had really great onions that, held well. So, and this person's also talked to others who have had soft, mushy onions. So Hannah, any hunches or thoughts on what might be causing that?
I would say my first thing that I would look at would be the watering. I know having like too much water can make onions more soft or mushy or cause disease or rot. Also like really humid hot conditions and then having like watering them during that. I know before harvesting, you're supposed to stop watering about a couple weeks before. So just making sure to let the onions dry out between waterings. That would be my first hunch, but that's just my initial thoughts for what I found.
Yeah, and I guess a couple of other thoughts, and this is one Hannah and I had a discussion earlier about sometimes it can be this, that, or the other thing. And this is a case where it can be hard to maybe narrow down for us online, but some other things to consider would be the type of onion that is being sold as a bulb versus plant. For example, is it a different variety and one that stores better or stores not as well? And the other thing to remember when planting onions from bulbs or plants, there could be an instance that there was some sort of a pathogen in there that took hold that could have been an issue as well. So a variety of things to consider. Now, Hannah, we have another onion question about walking onions. And I don't know if you've heard of these. Okay. And I know my significant other is listening to Garden Hour tonight, and we've had conversations about walking onions, and I'm pretty sure we planted some when I lived in Iowa. But walking onions is a form of perennial onion that people can still enjoy in their gardens. And so the question is, are walking onions used for their greens, or is the bulb edible as well? And Robin, I'm going to call on you because I feel like you might know the answer to this one. I feel like I only ate the greens, but my memory's a little fuzzy on that one. Do you have any insights on walking onions, Robin?
Yeah, the bulbs are edible, so all parts. Yeah.
Awesome. We're going to get all the onions, the commercial kind and the native plant kind and the fun walking kind. And Robin, we also had some feedback that someone has used your method of digging native plants. Oh, okay. Nope. I apologize. I was kind of bungling that. So someone else in the audience just wants the other person to know that they've dug native plants from the pasture, and their suggestion was taking the clumps, soaking them in a water for a while, and pulling out that grass. Ooh, I like that idea.
Yeah, I saw that too. And I think, yeah, that's a great suggestion. So I guess I wasn't sure as far as the first question, whether the brome showed up, after they had planted and it was in the yard, or whether they just dug out literally a clump. Because in that case, yeah, definitely you're going to get some stragglers on there. And if you are transplanting plants like that, I would recommend, disentangling the roots. And as the one person said, kind of soaking them first would be very helpful for that, but making sure that you're not bringing in any unwanted species, because that's definitely a possibility.
And really, really good advice. And we're hearing another anecdote from another one of our awesome master gardeners that they grow Patterson onions from seed and they keep extremely well. I'm still using Patterson onions, harvest early last August and stored in our garage. And Hannah, would you say that your experiences from lab taste tests and keeping track of storage, has that been the case as well?
Definitely. Yeah, they last a very, very long time. I think I've heard one person said that they lasted up to a year, so I thought that was pretty cool.
Excellent. And I just want to call out for folks that Robin did drop her native plant survey in the chat as well. Well, I feel like I maybe oversold my aspect of tonight's garden hour, and I don't want people to be on too much of a cliffhanger. So I'm just going to share maybe a couple of photos to round out the night versus the whole kit and caboodle. And I just feel very fortunate to share, if I can, goodness sakes, I'm out of practice. Okay, there we go. So it feels a little bit like, where in the world is Waldo, but where in the world has Kristine been? And as some of you know, if you've been a watcher of Garden Hour before, I love all things related to high tunnels. And if this is your first time seeing me on Garden Hour, welcome. We're so glad you're here. Nice to meet you. But I really am passionate about high tunnels. So that has been keeping me busy for the last few weeks. And we just wrapped up construction of our second high tunnel on the SDSU campus in Brookings. And I really do want to say that from my perspective, it was a labor of love and it really did take a village. We had SDSU facilities and services personnel. We had farmer trainers from Wayward Springs, Blue Sky Vegetable Company, and Waldner Farms who served as trainers. And we had participants from the NRCS, from as far away as Earhart and Fergus Falls, Minnesota, which is really fun. And we had extension personnel and we had folks who, you know, are getting started in farming or expanding their farms or curious about adding a high tunnel to their property. So over the course of a 4-day event, we pretty much started from no high tunnel to finished high tunnel. And it was a really, really fun endeavor. And I'm thinking I'm going to probably table the rest of this discussion in the interest of time for future times. But I will share that if you're interested or thinking about building a high tunnel, I'm going to jump ahead really quick, and just share. I have previously recorded a conversation called "So You're Thinking About Building a High Tunnel." And I really want to encourage you to take a look at that because from my perspective and that did not do what I wanted it to. From my perspective, it is a lot of thinking about a high tunnel is really planning for it, how you're going to use it, how you're going to tie into water, what's the permitting process? Do you want electricity? Do you not want electricity? Where on your farm are you going to put it? What are you going to grow in it? And so I have previously recorded a conversation about that. And this is also on YouTube, and I'll drop a link before we close out for the night. But just really, if you're starting to think about high tunnels, I'd encourage you to start with this recording just to start thinking about what should I be planning for. And there are resources available through entities such as the NRCS and the EQIP program where you can get funding for high tunnels. And that can be a really useful resource. And some of the folks who were at our workshop had taken advantage of those opportunities. So with that, as our time together comes to a close, are there other questions from the audience? And Hannah and Robin, I'm going to call you back and ask you if you have any words of wisdom as we think about moving forward for the rest of the week for our gardening world. Maybe what you plan on doing outdoors, even if it is just staring out the window and waiting for it to dry out.
Yeah, well, it looks like the sun has actually just kind of peeked out just now. It's kind of the clouds have parted. Yeah, I really haven't gotten a lot of garden planting done yet, so I'm trying to get to that now, and hopefully the rain will hold off here for a couple of days this week that I can get some of that regular vegetable garden planted. But yeah.
Right. And how about you, Hannah? What's on the docket for the rest of the week or next week? Maybe you want to share with people. Oops. Maybe you want to share with people how you're going to be taking data next week.
Yeah, so next week we are collecting data in our newly planted onions on the weed pressure. So if you're interested in volunteering as a master gardener volunteer, you are welcome to come join us, and I'll be sending out another email to you guys tomorrow. But yeah, so we'll be collecting data on weed pressure. super excited for that, just to see the results from our first data collection of the season. So yeah.
Excellent. And I think I'll share that I'm just super proud of our entire graduate student team. They've been doing awesome work, and it's been really fun doing some recent events with folks like Robin and Sydney. And I will let everyone know, much the same way that Native Plant Initiative is planning a bunch of awesome events for the summer. For SDSU Extension, especially July through September, we're going to have a great field day lineup this year, both, or not just both. Kind of scattered across the state, and especially along the I-29 corridor. But we're going to have events in Beersford, South Dakota on campus so that you can see our graduate student research. And we're going to have some on-farm collaborative field days again this year. So do keep an eye out for that. I will have more information on that in June. And with that, we are at time. But I can guarantee same time, same Zoom link next week, different cast of characters. But we look forward to seeing you again on Garden Hour next week, or any Garden Hour of your choosing in the future. And by golly, bring a friend along next time. We'd love to see you. So have a great evening, everybody, and thanks for tuning in.